Thanks everyone for joining. We have an interesting panel discussion ahead of us looking at coronavirus impact and some of the innovative companies that are providing solutions to help address that crisis. With me today we have Tuomas from Mobidiag, John Ashley from ResonanceDx, and Oliver Schacht from Curetis. I'm going to quiz them a little bit on some of the things that they're seeing in their relative spaces and how their companies are helping to address this pandemic with some of their products. But perhaps before I do that, I'd like to give them each an opportunity to give a little bit of background about who they are and what companies they represent. So perhaps with that, I'll maybe start with Tuomas from Mobidiag.
Okay, thanks, John. Yes, I'm Tuomas Tenkanen, the CEO of Mobidiag. Personally, I have been working all my working life around the PCR technology. First, I worked at New England Biolabs in the Boston area for about 1 year, and then joined a company called Finzymes, where I was leading the R&D, and I was also one main shareholder in the company. We ended up to sell the company to Thermo Fisher Scientific in 2010, and this is now my second round. You know that you cannot stop when you have always been building something. That 3 years after selling Finzymes, we merged 3 companies to get a unique technology package, both on the platform development, assays, and even an IVD structure. And now we are very happy that we have a molecular diagnostic company that is focusing on infectious disease detection. We have our headquarters in Espoo, Finland, and subsidiaries in Paris, London, and Stockholm. We have 2 platforms on the market, AmpliDiag and Novodiag. AmpliDiag is for high throughput testing for centralized laboratories, and Novodiag is the random access cartridge-based, easy to use system. Novodiag platform is capable of performing both targeted tests like our COVID-19 test is. It's only few targets that we are detecting, but we have also the high multiplexing syndromic capabilities, and there, for example, our parasite test that is detecting pretty much all the infectious parasites from stool samples. So we really have the flexibility to go from both targeted and syndromic panels. And why we are really then differentiating from the competition, and maybe one big difference is that we have been focusing from the very beginning to the usability, scalability, and we have really been thinking that whatever we are doing, we need to be able to automatize the manufacturing, and really looking from the beginning the cost of goods. And this has brought us to a rather interesting position in the marketplace, having without compromising the technical capabilities, we can really achieve lower cost of goods. And we think that do all this, we can really bring the power of molecular diagnostic to the routine diagnostic use. And if we look at the COVID-19 test, it's obviously for the human being, it's not a nice situation, but it is a great opportunity to this kind of diagnostic companies. We reacted very rapidly to this. We were able to get first line information from our joint venture partner, Autobio Diagnostics from China, about the spread of the COVID-19. And we brought rather rapidly COVID-19 tests to both platforms, so to AmpliDiag and Novodiag platform. And this has been rather interesting time, and I'm sure that in our panel discussion we are coming back to this topic a bit more of the spices of this time. In the beginning, now we have really focused on the COVID-19 to our direct countries. That means Finland, Sweden, France and UK. And we think that we have been rather successful having the power of these two platforms. And as an example, in Finland, majority of the tests done in Finland is done with our tests. So we are pretty much manufacturing 7 days a week and 24 hours a day in 3 shifts the tests for the market needs. But that's us. Happy to be participating to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Tuomas. Oliver, why don't you go next?
Sure, that's actually an easy one. Contrasting the Curatus, and frankly, I'm here today now in my new role as Chief Executive Officer of OpGen, NASDAQ listed, US headquartered. We combined our businesses April 1st with Curatus. So I've been in molecular diagnostics for 23 years. My own background is actually in corporate finance, M&A. I co-founded a cancer diagnostics company called Epigenomics in a backyard in Berlin. We developed the world's first blood-based colorectal cancer screening test. To this day, it is the only FDA-approved colorectal cancer screening test from blood. We IPO'd that company in 2004. They're still around. I always wanted to bring that company to the US, and when I was running their US operations for 7 years, the board decided to not go down that road. I took a decision. I joined the board of Curatus as a non-executive director in 2010, and then joined Curatus as CEO in April of 2011. So it's been a little over 9 years. Taken that again from a prototype, sample in, answer out, cartridge-based platform to differentiate the Univero platform in broad strokes from some of the platforms that were just recently mentioned at Mobidiag. We basically have broader multiplexing capability. Our panel sizes range all the way up to 130 targets with a very strong focus, not just on pathogen ID, but on antimicrobial resistance. To that end, we also picked up from Siemens what many believe to be one of the world's largest databases based on next-gen sequencing and artificial intelligence of proprietary antimicrobial resistance markers, which frankly was one of the key reasons to bring together OpGen with Curatus. For us, at Curatus, we now have a US listing. We have access to NASDAQ. That's worked out great here in recent months already. But we have a broader portfolio. We have a direct and combined US sales and marketing organization. We have the Curatus Univero platform. We have the OpGen Acuitas platform. And we have on both sides leading databases, the OpGen one based on the Merck strain collection. So our COVID activities have sort of been as a bolt-on really in 3 key areas. Number one, our lead product has always been pneumonia. And if you look at the reality, we just published a clinical study, interim data from Karolinska in Sweden, showing that 1 out of every 4 patients being hospitalized for COVID ends up getting a bacterial pneumonia as a co-infection. Depending on the study and country, up to half of all death cases have actually not been directly from the virus, but from bacterial co-infections, either pneumonia or sepsis. And so that's sort of our primary focus, because that's the underlying pandemic of antimicrobial resistance. Now, we have been commercially distributing rapid PCR tests. We've developed something more serendipitously than anything else, basically a solution that avoids the key bottleneck of RNA preparation kits, which at least in the early months were very short in supply. Takes about half an hour from the time to result, takes about 80% of the cost out of the sample prep piece, and allows folks to go straight from a swab into the PCR with what we call PULP, PCR-compatible universal lysis buffer. It's kind of ironic when you spend more than a decade and hundreds of millions developing very complicated multiplex sample-to-answer platforms, you end up selling and commercializing in Europe, in the United States, and really globally, what I call my magic blue secret sauce. But we have labs, hospitals, and large corporates around the globe that are basically addressing one of the key bottlenecks here. That said, we also have our own portfolio of COVID assays in a number of forms and shapes that we're looking down to the next layer here, whether it's genetic strain variants that we're tracing. Again, we've deployed a lot of these bioinformatics solutions through OpGen in New York State with the New York State Department of Health. That's sort of one angle. And then again, on the next gen sequencing side with RS Genetics. but really commercial execution game with roughly $6 million combined pro forma revenue, and for a growth trajectory. And it's sad but true that infectious disease diagnostics through this pandemic has been put in the spotlight. I think generally in Europe things have gone extremely well, and we can all be grateful of being here in Europe. But also from an industry perspective, it's been fabulous to see how folks have rallied, changed their R&D portfolios, talk about 24/7 manufacturing, absolutely, making sure that solutions have been made available in record time. So a lot of things have gone well, but I also think part of this discussion can be some of the hard lessons learned that collectively, how do we even better prepare for the next pandemic? Because there's no question there will be one. Who knows whether it's 3 months, 3 years, or 30 years from now, but undoubtedly there will be more. And again, whether it's diagnostics, therapeutics, vaccines, but on the diagnostics front, the testing challenge will always be there to help really manage these pandemic situations.
Thanks, Oliver. And no doubt there's a high probability of a second wave not too far in the future. Great. John, why don't you tell us a little bit about ResonanceDx?
Yeah, thanks, John. And thanks, everybody, for joining us today. I think it's a very great and interesting conversation. My background is in more general medical technology, traditional products such as implants and heart catheters and surgical techniques. So I'm not as seasoned in the diagnostics world as Tuomas and Oliver, but I'm excited about ResonanceDx. This is a technology that was developed jointly between Emory and Georgia Tech, and it's based on a very different approach to this situation, where you're using an acoustic biosensor. It's basically a very tiny scale, fabricated in a wafer foundry, and the folks at Georgia Tech are the electronic wizards, and the people at Emory were the biology specialists. They determined how they could put active biomarkers on top of the scale, so that anytime you have an antibody-antigen interaction, the weight on the scale changes. And so it's very sensitive, and you can not just detect that there's a presence of an infectious antigen, but you can quantify it as well. So the technology is similar to multi-panel kinds of approaches, in that we can put many scales on a sensor. And one of the advantages of doing that is we place both positive and negative controls on particular scales, and we place we can place different strains of viral antibodies on the scales to really fine-tune the sensitivity and specificity. So one of the goals we had with the company as we were developing this, and we are an emerging company, we're not commercial just yet, getting close, but one of our goals there was to kind of change the terminology of point of care. When people talk about point of care diagnostics, for the most part, they're talking about just moving the diagnostic test out of the central laboratory to somewhere else within the traditional healthcare system, primarily on the ward floor or in an emergency room. We like to try to think we're going to move that from point of care to point of need, and take it completely outside of the traditional healthcare system, such that this need in this current environment we're in with a pandemic, we need testing in many more locations to be able to support ongoing normal economic activity. So our product is, because of the positive and negative controls, is self-calibrating. It's very fast, under 5-minute test, and doesn't require any sophisticated machinery to operate. It's very simple plug and play. So our focus is to bring the product out so that it can be used in multiple use settings, such as airports, large event gatherings, and office buildings and that sort of thing outside the traditional healthcare settings. We're excited about that, and another differentiation is we're not a lot of the challenge in the last few months with the diagnostic testing that's occurred has been, scaling up with all the other ancillary products, swabs to take samples, reagents to run samples, and more equipment to do higher throughput of the samples. We're not requiring any hard to manufacture or expensive reagents, and we're doing the testing with a saliva sample from the patient. So very easy to collect when somebody is go into an airport or go back to work in their office building, or pretends go to view a sporting event or a theatrical production. Very quick to take that sample and get the test results. So we're excited about bringing that out there to help the economic challenges that everyone's facing around the globe.
Right. Thank you. Very, very interesting. Excellent. I think I'll just jump straight into the questions. And I think the next one is one I'd kind of like all of you to address, and that relates to business impact. And for those of you that are kind of commercial, would be great to hear, what is the demand you're seeing, for your products, and has it increased, and is there a bit of a land and expand strategy where you're placing more systems, and then, once normal diagnostics resumes, do you expect that to kind of be an ongoing long-term tailwind? And then I guess for those of you that are not commercial yet, have you seen an increase in inbound interest from investors wanting to invest in the space? Because I know on my side, certainly, probably along with digital health, life science tools is right up there in terms of the hottest things that investors are coming to ask JP Morgan about. Maybe let's start with Tuomas.
Yeah. So yes, and for sure this COVID-19 situation has influeed a lot the situation, and we can see that there has been a decrease of our kind of non-COVID products at the moment. Our main focus has been on the gastroenteric infections and antibiotic resistance as well. And it's natural that when there are isolation, the people are not getting the gastroenteric infections on the same amounts. And the other topic is that they really don't want to go to see the doctor for those reasons. They are afraid to go to doctor. So there has been a decrease of our normal product sales, although there has been also exceptions. There are large laboratories that see that moving the traditional testing to molecular diagnostic, to the AmpliDiag automated systems, are freeing resources that they urgently needed in this COVID situation. So there has been laboratories that have made this switch due of the COVID-19. That has been a positive impact also in that area. But generally speaking, we have seen a negative impact on our non-COVID, but the COVID-19 sales has been really grown so rapidly that it's fully compensating, and so we are clearly on the positive side in this COVID-19 situation. And it's also been rather interesting because I think that I think this situation is evolving all the time. In the beginning, when it was really need of everything, it was clear that there is no company that could supply the needed tests, no matter what was the company. I think we all have seen very nice equipment in the hospital laboratories that are standing there because they don't get supply for those systems. And what we have been doing in this COVID-19 situation is that we put a huge effort to secure the workflow from, so that we are securing our customers' workflow from the beginning, from the swabs to the results. So we took care of topics that we are not normally taking care. We purchased from China a significant amount of nasal swabs, so to secure that the customer had those in use. It was clear that even sample tubes, not only the sample media, but even there has been lack of the plasticware, the sample tubes. What we did was that we built rapidly our own mold to manufacture the sample tubes and made our own sample media as well to secure that fast. And we really worked the whole workflow, and then being really kind of tight that we are not trying to get more customers, that we can secure this workflow, because that would be the worst situation to be, to sell the instruments but not being able to secure the usage. And from our perspective, this has been very, very good strategy. On the Mobidiag side, like I said, that we have been manufacturing and are continuously manufacturing full time with our automatized manufacturing lines, but the capacity is still sufficient only to our local market. That we have been not capable of serving, for example, our distributors do all the huge needs. So that it has been, I would say, quite interesting. But I think that this is all the time changing. There are now we are on Europe, we are on a bit lower speed at the moment, but in US, you guys there are really I think that the US companies are really focusing to the US market, meaning that there are no resources left to the European market at the moment. But I think also that the needs for the tests are changing. That in the beginning, the availability was the most important thing. Now we are entering to the field in Europe, for example, that there are need to really to follow all the positive cases and the people that has been in contact with those positive cases. That means that you need to detect very low amount you need to extreme sensitivity that in the active case was not that important. And when we are moving forward, I think that it's not sufficient to have only COVID tests. When there is the next influenza season, you really need to have combination tests where you are detecting not only COVID, but influenza A, B, RSV, the normal suspects in the influenza, because it's obvious that if you have the syndromes, you really want to know first, is it COVID-19 or not? And then, of course, if not, what it is. So I think this is evolving, and the different geographical areas are in different phase. And it might be when US is in a better situation, we are seeing already the next wave. Next wave in Europe will be seen.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Tuomas. Oliver, from your side, how has COVID been impacting you kind of today, and what do you see coming in the horizon kind of next 12 to 18 months, for example?
Well, short version, just echoing what Tuomas said, the good, the bad, the ugly. I mean, we've seen delays in China with the regulatory authorities being shut down. We've seen delays in the United States FDA due to emergency use authorizations. They've put other submissions kind of on the back burner. Clinical trials getting put on hold. No orthopedic surgeries. Therefore, one of our orthopedic panels, or intra-abdominal, if you don't do elective surgeries, or don't do surgeries unless you absolutely have to, there's fewer infections there. So that's the ugly. net, it's actually worked out really well for us. First quarter, was basically as strong as the fourth quarter last year. Pneumonia being one of the key drivers, and then COVID per se, of course, also. Long term, I think what's going to be key is a more comprehensive solution portfolio rather than I've got one kit or one test. And we've obviously teamed up in Europe with Menarini as a pan-European distribution partner. Now you can imagine these guys are headquartered in Florence, based in northern Italy. They were effectively shut down as a corporation for the better part of several months. Now that they're coming out of it, they've gathered an extraordinary amount of knowledge. And if you look at their publications and public statements in Europe, they've assembled a fantastic portfolio of products in the COVID arena, antibody tests, PCR tests, platforms, really comprehensive. So that's certainly a way. And the other thing, as bad as it is clinically in the U.S. right now, having a direct commercial team in the U.S. on the ground, focusing on those products, again, has also helped tremendously. We've also all had to learn, like today here virtually, we had to learn how to place complicated systems virtually. You couldn't send sales or service people, yet we've done installations in New York State, in Manhattan. You ship a system and then you have to learn how to do video installation support and virtually guide your customers through. And we've done this in Europe. We've done it with distributors. We've done it with our old team directly in the US. And again, that's just been a lesson learned. And same as in the investor front, you asked, how have investors responded? You look at OpGen 9 months ago, in September of last year, OpGen was a $5 million market cap company, effectively, weeks of going out of business. Since then, we've not only combined the business, we've raised $28 million in equity capital here in recent months. So there's been tremendous interest. Again, sad but true that it took a pandemic to bring this to investors' minds, but it has also allowed us, with the business combination, to kind of take out a broader story and get some investors in there, raise some capital, and hopefully position the company for the next phase. So look at the next 12, 18, 24 months. Coronavirus will be with us for sure. But again, I agree with Tuomas that it'll no longer be just COVID or SARS-CoV-2 only. It'll have to be combination products. And I go beyond it. It has to be a complete solution portfolio for your customers where you can really address their entire COVID-19 related diagnostic and information or data.
Right, exactly. Perfect. John, on your side, probably pre-commercial, I would imagine, but I'm sure this is accelerating the pathway in some sense.
Yeah, absolutely, John. It was interesting because we were not focused on this area when things shut down. So much like Oliver's colleagues in northern Italy, we were kind of sitting around twiddling our thumbs for a few weeks until we pivoted. And then once we started in earnest collecting data on the COVID-19 testing, we are an essential business and back up and running, and able to get other organizations that were partnering with us back up and running too because of that, because they were supporting us. So that was good to be able to help people out in that manner. But I would also support what Oliver said. Even if you look back just a year ago and you go to a typical life science healthcare conference, the pharma is the one taking up most of the air in the room. Then digital health, some medical technology behind that, and diagnostics was kind of a poor stepchild, and the equation's totally flipped around. Suddenly we're at the front of the line in terms of getting investors' attention and having their interest. So that's fun to have that switched around, and it's a big difference. Again, from even a year ago. I agree with what Tuomas and Oliver have said, though. I see even 6 months from now the need for comprehensive COVID plus influenza type panels One of the things we were focusing on before was bacterial versus viral infections, and I think that's going to come into play as well. And then if you go beyond that, certainly 12 to 18 months, the need for the diagnostics doesn't go away. If we're fortunate and a great vaccine is available in, let's say, 8 months, it's going to take a couple of years for the world to get close to being vaccinated. that doesn't just snap a finger and overnight that happens. So this market opportunity, I think, is at least a 2 to 3 year market opportunity with where it is, and then from there, as this panel's already said, there will be other emerging infectious diseases that hopefully we're all building up a good infrastructure so that we can respond even faster than what we've seen here. So these tools will be needed going forward.
Excellent. And John, maybe I'll stick with you just for the next question, because I think my next question was more about like longer term impacts in the life science tools diagnostic space in terms of, infectious diseases in general and where we test for infectious diseases. And, you mentioned to me about how, you're using saliva collection and that will be done at various sporting events or big gatherings. Is your sense that this situation is acting as a catalyst that kind of is a light bulb moment for people to realize that we need more of these solutions going forward, and that when we think about point of care diagnostics, it's going to be even further down the kind of chain away from your core hospitals, et cetera, that do it?
Yeah, I think that is going to be the case. Certainly there's a big installed base of both technology and care providers and solutions already there. And it's been a struggle from the standpoint of that installed base, if you look back on the last 10 years or so, with the point of care movement. If you go to a big conference and you talk to 20 people about point of care, they all have a different idea of what that means to them. And there has been a struggle within the healthcare system of moving diagnostics closer and closer to the patient. And there's been progress made. I mean, now glucose testing is ubiquitous on, any ward floor. There's no samples being sent down to the central lab just to get updates on glucose. Blood gas levels are getting there too. So I do think that this is jump-starting the trend, and part of it is this innovation and technology we've been talking about. With that innovation and technology, there's more options available that don't require multi-step processes to get your test results, that are becoming more plug and play, that take the skill level down a notch, which is what you need to get it out of the central laboratory in the traditional healthcare setting. We certainly believe that patients that are going in to just see their primary care physician, or they're going into a local clinic, they should be able to know before they leave whether they have the flu, or they've got a cold, or they've got some other sort of bacterial infection or something else. There's no reason with the technology that's available today that can't be put into place. And they don't have to leave that setting and be given a prescription for antibiotics, which might do nothing for them because they have the flu, or maybe given a dose of Tamiflu, which will do nothing for them if they have a bacterial infection. And they have to wait a day or two for the lab results to come back to see what they really should be taking. So, that trend, which has been kind of a standard model in the US for the last decade or two, has added to this problem of bacterial resistance and superbugs. And we need to diagnose quickly and give patients the right sort of therapies so that they feel better sooner. And I do think that this unfortunate event is creating multiple avenues for that. One is what I've already said, the advancement of technology, but the other is the demand on the pull side from actual customers, and I mean from the general population itself, that they're questioning, why they're going in and having to wait in line for a test, why they don't get the results right away. Even within my own group, we've had our own infection scare in the last month where, somebody's daughter's friend was tested positive. So then you go through a whole cascade of, dozens and dozens of people getting tested because of their chain of exposure. And, the current available fast point of care test showed up with almost 50% false positive readings with that group. Obviously, this is an anecdotal story, but a pretty large set of people getting tested. And then they all went and got secondary tests and even third tests using PCR technology, like the companies Tuomas and Oliver have brought to market, and far more accurate and sensitive. And none of those people were positive. They all got two negative PCR tests. So that's happening out there, and it doesn't leave a good feeling in the general population when they are finding out that these tests they have to wait to get really good results. So I think that there's going to be a pull demand for this as well.
Right. And maybe Oliver, you have any kind of comments on what John just said?
Yeah, I mean, I would just the one fact that we've seen during this pandemic is that patients that were hospitalized, depending on country and hospital, somewhere between 70 and 80% of those patients were given broad-spectrum antibiotics empirically, i.e. in the absence of any diagnostic information. They were COVID patients, and yet out of an overabundance of caution. Now, if you look at the published data that's out there, our own study, again, anywhere between 15 and 25% of patients really do get a bacterial co-infection. What that really means is that somewhere between 60, 70% of patients were unnecessarily, massively overtreated with broad-spectrum antibiotics. And all that does, it compounds and creates the problem, and it worsens it by generating even more resistance. So I think that changing from a mode where you can always, and I know it's mentally much easier for clinicians, you do a diagnostic test, you get a result, you find something, and boom, you can add a drug. That's the easy one in many ways. But by the same token, when you have quality test results, and I think equally as important, and I think we're learning that the hard way, certainly with antibody tests, having a negative result can be just as valuable as a positive test. If you have a negative PCR test, you can rely on it. And then you do a negative bacterial panel, so you can exclude a bacterial infection, then frankly, you should not be giving these patients what frankly should be last line defense antibiotics, and kind of really it speaks to the value of diagnostics towards improving antibiotic stewardship. Because in the absence of getting new antibiotics, because pharma industry and biotech really aren't very successful in developing or financially incentivized to do it, let's put it that way, they're all getting out of this. Although today there was a new initiative by several big pharmas announced for $1 billion, sort of a JV that apparently is going to fund additional antibiotics developments. But the value of having a diagnostic test that allows you to rationally decide which of the existing antibiotics to use so that we can preserve them with the diagnostic result for as long as we can as society, as effective drugs in this fight, I think is going to be incredibly valuable. And I think, again, in many ways, there was an early rush in, January, February, March. One of the benefits of now sitting there and looking at over 100 PCR tests that have all been developed, a lot of them EUA cleared in the US, dozens of antibody tests, you also have the benefit of looking at some of the ugly data that's out there, and some of the things that frankly should never have been seeing the light of the market. You can then really position any new offering to specifically address some of the shortcomings in those portfolios. And antibody tests, frankly, will only work if we use them right we don't know what the population, infection rate is. Even if you have a 97, 98% specific test, if your population is only 5% historic COVID, your positive predictive value is in the 60s. Is that really what we're looking for? And that, I think, that appreciation for what it takes to develop a diagnostic to the level where it's clinically useful, but also economically and from a societal standpoint, rational to use and derive decisions from is hopefully one of the key lessons learned here in this pandemic.
Excellent. Thank you. I've just been told by the moderator that we have 5 minutes left. So maybe with my last question that perhaps all of you can briefly chime in on, about a minute and a half each, perhaps. It seems all of you have, created products that are addressing the current issue at hand. And as someone mentioned earlier on in the call, there's infectious diseases are going to be around, for as long as humans exist, and there will certainly be another pandemic. So I guess my question is, when we think about innovation going forward, what are some of the interesting developments that you see on the horizon? And feel free to take that question wherever you want to, and then maybe I'll start with Tuomas on this one.
I think that from my perspective, there is a link to all of these three companies that are present in this panel discussion, and that is the syndromic testing, because that is bringing, you really need enough data to get good results to treat correctly, like Oliver was explaining, and I think that is something that we all agree. And there are different approaches. It was very interesting to hear about John, your approach to that area, and there is really a lot of room to develop to different angles of this. We are just in the beginning. We still are doing mostly targeted testing, but in my opinion, the only way to get, for example, to efficiently to the point of care as well is that you have syndromic testing, because then there are much less guesswork what has been causing. You don't, in the point of care, you shouldn't be asking that what bug I might have. You should say that what kind of syndromes you have, and then have a test to tell most probably what is causing that. And this is the development that is in US. US is much advanced on this area already, but I think that we are just in the beginning of this development, and there are different kind of needs. I don't see that none of us are competing with each other. We are actually paving the other companies' way to this market area. But I think that it's the innovation there, how to utilize different technologies to have a lot of data in one single test, and I think that's the area where we should focus.
Excellent, thank you, Tuomas. John, maybe go to you now.
Sure, real quick. I think it's a much overused buzzword, but I do think all these tests have good fundamental science in terms of biology and genetics, but I do see that machine learning and artificial intelligence is helping to parse the information in more efficient ways and improve specificity, improve sensitivity, so that these tests are becoming more and more reliable. So that's the technology I see that's going to leverage the sound biology and help push this forward.
Perfect. And last but certainly not least, Oliver.
Well, I'll just echo what John just said. I think PCR multiplex syndromic panel is the present, and it's probably going to be around for a number of years. But the future is really going to be next-gen sequencing and AI-powered algorithms, because you've got to get away from detecting bugs and maybe predicting or identifying resistance to actually predicting susceptibility. And if you look at the ability to predict antibiotic susceptibility, i.e. not what drug can I no longer give, but which one should I give, the only way to get there is data that's substantially broader than any multiplex PCR panel will ever get you. So it's got to boil down to next-gen sequencing and AI-powered algorithms. So hopefully in this next phase in infectious disease, we're going to get to where oncology already is, namely where it's in the information, it's in the data that truly personalizes the treatment decisions and not looks at one bug and one resistance markers and making relatively uninformed choices about treatment.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. I thought that was a great discussion, and you know, this is the space of the moment, and your efforts are helping, you know, humanity globally. So I thank you for your discussion, but also I thank you for all the efforts that your companies are doing to help the situation and help control, you know, this virus and other human-related problems that are going to exist in the future. So thanks very much for being with us today, and I think all of us listening to this panel will look with excitement as to what comes next with you in the sector in general. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, John.
Thank
This
you
is a
very
great
much.
panel. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.